Nice speaking with you today, Suneel. This is going to be an interesting topic on behavioral economics and its relation to supply chain. Can you first provide us with a brief background of yourself?
Thanks, Dustin. I can assure you this is a very interesting topic. My team, which includes me, has worked in the area of improving the operations and supply chain effectiveness and capabilities of organizations in emerging and growth markets. Understandably, these markets pose different challenges like infrastructure bottlenecks, we could call it market liquidity, interest rates, inflation, availability of commodity, access, affordability of users, so on and so forth. You can name a myriad of them. We have been extremely successful, and I should say that I take pride in saying that we have been very successful in improving the capabilities of multiple organizations, some of them family-owned, multinational corporations, government institutions by several notches. While we did all this over the years, we focused predominantly on process reengineering, Lean and Six Sigma, mathematical modeling, managing trade-offs, all this rational part of supply chain. In the meanwhile, a few years back, one of my senior colleagues, who's a well-known authority in supply chain, encouraged us to read behavioral economics. We were inspired by the work of Kahneman and Richard Thaler, both of whom have got a Nobel Prize in this particular area. And both of them have based their premise on an assumption that all our behavior is irrational, and there are reasons why it is irrational. We started our company worxogo based on these principles and worked on building an AI engine. Today, we have had a very promising start. We have 75,000 users across 25 organizations using our application to improve their performance.
Talk about what is behavioral economics and its relation to supply chain.
Let me give you a few examples to highlight the fact how there is irrationality and the relevance of using behavioral economics in supply chain. Let's take a retail store. Surprisingly, we have observed that retail stores overstock high margin items and understock low margin items during season. When we delved into the detail, we realized there is a tendency for the merchandiser or the inventory specialists to take one of the variables, which is either the carrying cost of carrying or the cost of ordering while taking a decision. In case of high margin items, there is a tendency to overlook the ordering costs and take decisions purely based on the inventory carrying cost. In case of low value items, it's the other logic which kicks in, wherein I order in bulk to preserve or optimize only my carrying cost. And it creates a significant double whammy in its supply chain. Let me give you another example. Let's take two supply chain partners who are equally capable. To one partner, I indicate that you do well by the end of period, which may be 6 months or a year. I will give you incentives, performance incentives worth, let us say $10,000. To the second supply chain partner, I say, look, of same capability. Remember, he's of same capability. I go and tell him that you have been performing very well in the past. I trust you and I give you your incentive upfront. But there is a catch. If you don't perform, I will deduct X amount every quarter. Now take these two contrast cases. Invariably, intuition tells us that the second partner who has been given his incentive upfront will perform well. And that's rightly so. It has been observed that if someone who has to lose money, in this case the second supply chain partner who has already been paid is $10,000, tries to put in at least 2 times more effort than someone who works for a potential gain. However, if you look into performance incentives across organizations, most of them are risk averse. They tend to talk about a gain in the future after they see the performance. And this is very stark. The third one, I will give you an example of forecasting. There will be millions spent in improving the forecasting accuracy of the algorithms. However, if you compare, and these have been done to improve the mean absolute deviation or standard deviation or mean absolute percentage error, whichever you may call it. However, not much attention has been given towards improving the forecast bias or the mean percentage error. Okay. Interestingly, in most cases, there is a significant bias created by business ambition to capture a particular market. And this substantially leads to a forecast bias. Why do we tend to overlook this forecast bias and focus on a wrong problem? All this leads to the significance of behavior biases in the supply chain. We have been fortunate enough so far to collect millions of behavioral instances of people working in supply chain. And what stands out, and increasingly we are gaining knowledge, is these are governed by some basic fundamental rules. Interestingly enough, the memory and forgetfulness of a person, which is his cognitive capability, plays a significant role. The second one is his cognitive biases. The third is social and individual identity. The fourth is his individual work style preferences. If we could tap into all these aspects, we could deliver multiple value in the current supply chains.
How is this relevant to supplier relationships?
A great deal of work has been done by the supply chain community in improving the supplier relationship, and it has in a way, more than in a way, transformed the entire supply chains across different industries and sectors. Coming to behavioral economics can be applied across the supplier lifecycle management, starting right from identifying a supplier to selecting a supplier, developing and operationalizing a supplier, to the actual execution process and rating, the vendor rating. Let me take an example from the release of a purchase order to inverting material as a part of the execution cycle. This is a role which is played by the supply chain expediters in any organization. Most of these expeditors have been trained for planning, applying the basic concepts of planning. However, we see that most of them revel in chasing and firefighting. Why is it so? When planning is more beneficial. The reasons are simple if we look from a behavioral economics lens. First and foremost, any expediter typically would be chasing a few hundreds or several thousands of items or part numbers. If every part number needs to undergo 5 steps of value addition in the upstream value chain at the supplier, the complexity expands. The 1,000 part numbers which a supplier needs to chase becomes 5,000 events on which he needs to keep a track on. So it's very difficult and asking for impossible. It's pretty painful also, not a great experience to have. On top of it, if I as an expediter follow up on some certain components, raw materials which are on fire and get them somehow on time, I am treated like a hero. The pleasure which my brain derives out of such heroics, is immense. It's significantly higher than the pain which I undergo during chasing. In behavioral economic parlance, this is known as a peak and rule. And the behavior of the expeditors gets governed by this peak and rule, where there is more pleasure to be derived on account of heroics, and such a behavior gets reinforced. What's the way out of this? How do they make them? How can we make them do a better planning? The answer lies in a bit of process from a behavior aspect. Since the buyer or the supply chain expediter is chasing material based on a shortage list which is triggered by someone from the shop floor, the data which is residing in the schedules is overlooked. In several organizations, the accuracy of this data could be as low as 60 to 70%, which gives no motivation to the supplier to trust this data and work on this. A, because the data is inaccurate. 2, he expects a call from supply chain expediter based on the shortage lists to come to him at any given point in time. So for him, the lowest effort would be to wait for a call. Additionally, suppliers would not like to give a commitment on every schedule because they feel there is a transfer of risk onto themselves. So they would abhor giving a commitment in written. The third aspect is organizations would prefer certainty of all schedules and would not prefer an prediction which is based on what is the risk and uncertainties around a certain part number hitting them on time. All these put together behave in a way to confound a simple purchase order to material inverting transaction. By playing on this, when I say by playing on this, I would say by influencing the right behaviors, we could dramatically crash the supply lead times. We can improve the on-time in performance and also make the supplier profitable. Besides this, the life of supply chain expediter the quality of life of supply chain expediter can improve dramatically.
Can you share where you've seen some success in putting these concepts into practice?
My startup worxogo, where I'm a co-founder, helps in improving performance behavior of people in organizations through a unique AI-based engine. We focus on the areas of sales, supply chain, and innovation. We are witnessing very robust economic outcomes through shaping behavior. In the area of supply chain, we have had significant impact. We are witnessing a step change improvement in some of the KPI outcomes, such as threefold increase in on-time and in-full performance. We have witnessed up to 50% reduction in supply lead times in the supply chain. We have seen a 95% improvement in prediction accuracy within the supply chain. And all this by improving employee engagement 8 to 10-fold. That's the crux of it, by improving employee engagement 8 to 10-fold. Thank you.
And thank you, Suneel, for sharing today.
My pleasure. My pleasure.